Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Ave Maria Press Professional Development Webinar Series. In today's webinar, Stacey Sumereau will share how to walk with young people in the area of discernment. My name is Erin Pierce. I am the publicist at Ave Maria Press. Everyone in the audience is muted today, but you are able to ask questions. Questions can be sent to our presenter using the questions section on the GoToWebinar panel that you see here on the slide. And I'll read as many as those questions as possible at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and I'll send you a link to the recording via email tomorrow. And you are welcome to share it with colleagues, friends, family, whoever you'd like. With that, I would like to welcome and introduce our presenter today. Stacey Sumereau is a Catholic author and speaker, as well as the host of the Called and Caffeinated podcast and YouTube show. Previously, she performed in Broadway national tours of The Wizard of Oz and Beauty and the Beast, and starred in the reality television show The Sisterhood, Becoming Nuns. In 2020, Stacey founded and hosted online conferences and courses, the Be Not Afraid Conference, the God's Adventure Awaits Summit, and the True North Discernment course to help people overcome anxiety, fear, and loneliness, develop decision-making skills, and discern their calling with clarity and peace. Stacey has contributed to the Ascension Press Presents YouTube channel and written for the National Catholic Register, Vocations and Prayer Magazine, and lifenews.com. She has presented at the National Catholic Youth Conference, the Los Angeles Religious Education Congress, and dioceses across the country. She and her husband are raising their 4 children in the Washington, D.C. area. Stacey, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for that gracious introduction, Erin.
Oh, absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and make the presenter here.
Okay. All right.
We see it.
Welcome. And great. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you, Erin. It's wonderful to be with you today. Thank you for taking the time. I'm looking forward to providing as much value as I can with the short amount of time that we have today. There's so much I want to say, so let's get started. As Erin mentioned, my name is Stacey Sumereau. I live in the beautiful Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. But I want to take you back real quick to where my discernment journey started. Here I am on the Wizard of Oz national tour. That's me playing the mayoress of Munchkinland, as well as when I went on for Glinda, I was her understudy, and I also was a flying monkey. So I was living my childhood nightmare and a poppy and a citizen of Oz. And then over on this slide, this was when I was on the Beauty and the Beast national tour, little movie that you might have heard of. And it was during that time that I really started to become discontented with my life. So I went as hard as I possibly could for my dreams. I've always been a passionate person. I've always gone as hard as I can at whatever it is that I love and that I care about. And so it was during this time when I was on the national tours, I was at the top of my field. I should have been ecstatic, according to what I thought. But my operating system needed an upgrade, and I started getting what I call the worm of discontent. And if you're mentoring or shepherding anybody through a period of discernment and they are feeling this worm of discontent, please tell them it's actually a gift. It's a good thing to have this form of discontent. And that actually led me away from theater. It led me to discerning religious life. And I'll just show you a little quick shot of the 5 young women who went and visited 3 different convents over the course of summer. The television show was on Lifetime in 2014. It was a small part of my religious discernment. People always want to know, was it a real discernment? And I love to tell them, yes, it was. Not necessarily what you see on television, but what happened behind the scenes. When the cameras were not rolling, I was praying a lot. We did a holy hour and mass with the sisters every day. And before and after the show, I also spent months, better part of a year, discerning religious life. And it was really in that time that I had to confront this fear that I had, that God's will must be the thing that I hate. And it was in that time when I started to actually understand my dreams weren't enough to make me happy. And my operating system was being upgraded, as I mentioned, but it felt like a big step backwards. So I'm really excited to share, what I've learned in the intervening time about what to do with all those really unpleasant, difficult, uncomfortable emotions that come along with discernment. So eventually I discerned out of religious life. That's a whole other story, but I started getting all of these messages because my show aired worldwide. And so I started getting hundreds of messages from people all around the world who had a similar struggle to mine. And I started understanding that there was an enormous lack of formation in discernment, the art of discernment. So I became a learner because I wasn't really in a position to lead anybody myself. And I approached my own learning and my podcast from the standpoint of a curious learner. I wanted to talk to people who were more knowledgeable and smarter than myself. And I have done so for the past 7 years. I've released over 100 episodes of the Called and Caffeinated podcast, as well as many episodes on my YouTube channel. And those have been such life-giving conversations. So I've had this interesting kind of perspective of approaching as someone who knows nothing, but has heard from a lot of people who also know nothing and can draw out those common threads of what we're all struggling with and be a voice for those struggling in discernment. And then talking to people like Dr. Scott Hahn, Father Mike Schmitz, Jackie and Bobby Angel, people who are way smarter and have been at this for a lot longer than I have. Oh, Father Timothy Gallagher, how's he for a discernment coach right there? So he was on my podcast last year. And so it's grown into this whole ministry, and I absolutely love it. And I have a lot of sympathy and a lot of empathy for those who are going through discernment anxiety, because that's really where I started. So eventually I met a man who wanted to be a monk for 6 years. So we truly were a match made in heaven. And that's a picture of our family. We have this family tradition where every time we get family pictures taken, I get pregnant immediately. So this picture was taken last November, and now I'm expecting baby number 5 arriving in August of this year. Hooray, hooray. And you could say Adventure Awaits is like the perfect title for my book, because we had 4 babies in our first 5 years of marriage, and now I'm pregnant with baby number 5. My oldest just turned 8. So, we don't really like sleep. We don't like quiet dinners in this house, but we are absolutely loving, this adventure of raising our children. There's nothing more worth it. I'm also a discernment and mindset coach trained by Metanoia Catholic. So if you like what you hear today and you're like, I want to go deeper, please reach out to me through my website. Okay, let's get into a fun little game I like to call discernment myths. So I'm going to share some thoughts. Thoughts are sentences in our mind. I'm going to share some of the thoughts that occur to us in discernment that can be the biggest stumbling blocks. There are many others that are possible, but these are just some of the big ones. When I hit my next milestone, then I'll be happy. At some point in the future, life will feel predictable and I'll stop being surprised. Everyone else around me knows what they're doing and I'm the only one who doesn't. If I miss my one, quote unquote, perfect vocation, I won't get to heaven. Feel free to laugh at all these, by the way, or cry, because this is truly what people who are in discernment anxiety are thinking. If I were prettier or holier or smarter, then I would know what to do. And the subtext underneath that thought is, but I'm not enough. I don't have the tools I need. I don't have what it takes, and God's not going to give it to me. And this is my favorite. God's will is sure to be the polar opposite of what I want. So we're going to talk about what to do when these things occur to us, when these are all temptations from the devil, these thoughts. The devil will suggest them to us, and what they do is they lead us away from relationship. And the truth about discernment is that discernment is relationship. Good discernment should actually lead you closer to the Lord. And so what I'm going to do today is spend a lot of the time helping you to understand how to help the people that you're leading get past these mental blocks, past these thoughts that are really difficult, that feel really true at different points, right? So, St. Paul says, by their fruits they shall be known, right? So the fruits of these thoughts, all the thoughts that I just shared, is blame, shame, frustration, confusion, disillusionment, and ultimately a lack of trust in God. I have thought all of those things at different times in my various discernment journeys, and we truly have to become the bouncer of our own minds to understand and recognize and root out the lies. So Pope Francis, God rest his soul, shared this beautiful pithy statement in 2022. He said, discernment requires a filial relationship. And I was actually just coaching a young lady last night who was so anxious about making the right choice. And she was like, I just don't want to do anything that God doesn't want me to do. And I was like, well, hold on right there. I said, you're praying, you love the Lord, you're doing your very best to listen for his voice, you're going to mass, daily mass as often as you can. God doesn't expect more from you for that, more from you than that. God is happy with you, like he's so pleased with you. And I use the example of my child coming to me. Now, this young lady was not a parent. So she kind of said, after I used this example, she was like, oh, that was a great example. I'm not a parent yet, so I would never have thought about this. But when we're thinking about a filial relationship, the example I gave her was, if my son came to me and was like, Mom, what should I be when I grow up? I'm not going to say to him like, oh, you have to be a lawyer, and I want you to go to this law school, and I want you to have these extracurricular activities, and I want you to marry this person, and you don't get to make any choices yourself. Do that or you're out of my will. That's not how a filial relationship works, right? A filial relationship is one in which my son comes to me and is like, hey, Mom, what do you think I should be when I grow up? And I would say to him, well, let's look at your talents. Let's look at what you like to do. What do you want to do? Where would you like to go? What are your interests? What are your passions? And I'd help him research colleges, and I'd help him go on college visits, and I'd kind of encourage him in the ways that I can see make him happy and fulfilled, because that's really what I want for him. But ultimately, the choice is his. It wouldn't be right of me to dictate every single choice in his life. So maybe you want to use that analogy. It was really cool to see, actually, this young lady. I could just see the weight of the world was lifting off her shoulders as I was saying this to her. And she was like, oh, I said, yeah, God actually, I think in this instance, God wants you to choose what it is that you want to do. So I want to share with you a QR code. This is to my website, and I give away this prayer of surrender. If you come across anybody who is, or you're leading anybody who's really struggling with either thinking that God's will is the opposite of what they want, or they're starting to make their discernment into any of these discernment myth kind of thoughts that I just shared, please feel free to log onto my website. And when you do, there'll be a pop-up, and you can enter your email address, and you'll get an email with a free packet that you're very welcome to share with them, called How to Make the Right Choice. It's a little bit provocatively named because, you know, I've just shared with you that like there isn't necessarily this one perfect choice, but people, you know, want to make the right choice. If there is one, there may be more than one right choice, but it's a packet of about 5 pages. And I believe on page 2 of that packet is a prayer of surrender. That absolutely changed my life. It is not the Surrender Novena. It is not St. Ignatius's surrender prayer. Those are also amazing. But this particular surrender prayer is a lot less well known. It kind of reads like a litany. And what it did for me was it really helped me to uncover the areas that I didn't want to surrender to the Lord, the areas where I wanted to hold on to what I wanted. And so that may be also helpful for the people that you're leading, because sometimes it's easy to say, like, when things feel like a mess, to be like, take it all, God, I don't want it. And sometimes it's really hard to surrender anything at all. But I noticed when I prayed that prayer, there were always 3, 4, 5 things maybe that I really wanted to hold on to myself. And those were exactly the things that I needed to surrender. And when I did, all the fruits would flow after that. God, when I finally unclamped my hot little hands and let the Lord have everything and prayed that prayer honestly, then he could let the blessings flow, and he could provide for every one of my needs as well as my desires. So that is a resource for you. Feel free to use it as many times as you want. Okay, let's move into discernment in the temperaments. Now, this is going to have to be a very top line, extremely top line discussion about the temperaments, because I could do an entire week-long course about the temperaments. And I'm not going to take the time to explain the 4 temperaments right now. I'll just give like a couple adjectives. So if you're not familiar with the temperaments, you'll be able to kind of latch on to each of the 4 ones really quickly. So let us talk about, first of all, we have the two components, really necessary components of discernment are a prayer and action, right? So we've got certain temperaments. The phlegmatic people are going to be more laid back. Melancholic, also that's known as like the saintly temperament. Melancholics tend to be very kind of very quiet. They're able to meditate for long periods of time. And when I say saintly temperament, I don't mean that that's the only temperament through which people become saints. I just mean that that is kind of the temperament that inclines you towards deep contemplation. So for those who are phlegmatic and melancholic, they may hear the advice, you know, pray in discernment. And they might say, okay, great. And they might decide that that's all that they have to do. But the truth is, we also have to take action. So the prayer piece is going to be really difficult for people like me, cholerics. You could describe me as a type A, very action oriented. So I see something that I want and I want to jump on it. I sense that something's not right, and the first thing I want to do is get out of there. The hardest part of discernment for cholerics like me was to learn to sit and surrender, to have an attitude of receptivity, to not be thinking of my to-do list during my holy hour, to really enter deeply into prayer. That goes against kind of my natural temperament, but that was the thing that I needed to hear most, like, this is what you need to do. Now, on the other hand, we've got the opposite extreme. We've got action. And the people who are type B, laid back, they're going to be the ones who are going to struggle to take that action, right? I always advise for, like, if someone's discerning religious life, I always say go visit at least 3 convents or 3 religious orders. Like, just give yourself a variety. And for someone like a phlegmatic or someone like a melancholic, it might be difficult to kind of stick with that discomfort of action, because action can sometimes feel really uncomfortable. Whereas for me, I'm like, I've got all my convents lined up. I'm going to go, you know, visit 3 convents this month. Like, that to me comes naturally. So cholerics are really going to be the people who are going to want to take action, and they're going to have no problem executing those plans. My husband is very type B. He's much more of a melancholic, and I am much more of a choleric. And he made me laugh so hard because he said, you know, Stacey, it's only type A people who want to classify type A and type B people, because type B people don't care enough. And it's so true. But I find that one of the hardest parts of being a discernment speaker is that people kind of hear what they want to hear. And so you've got your people who are very type B, and they hear prayer and they're like, great, I'm going to go do a holy hour. I'm going to go pray in my room. And I would love for God to just, you know, for the hand to come descend down from heaven in a vision and smoke and tell me what my plan is for my life. When the truth is that you actually do need also data to prove that decision to yourself. And then on the opposite extreme, you've got the people like me who go and do what they want and are terrified to ask the Lord what his will is. They're, you know, people of action, love them. You know, in some sense, we run the world, but at the same time, we need to make sure that we are taking on an attitude of receptivity and surrender. So that is, okay, that's half of it. Now we've got a little bit more to go for the temperaments. We've got desire is a huge part of discernment as well. Now, as I don't know if I shared this already. I don't think I did. The most hopeful thing that I could share, I think, with any young person who's discerning is that God's desire for you and your desire for yourself are one and the same. There's not a divide there. Like, when you move towards holiness, you're moving away from the best version of yourself, or the most true version of yourself, or everything that you want. They're actually dovetailing closer and closer. So for someone who's a sanguine is like the fun-loving personality. I have a 2-year-old who is a clown. He's a sanguine. He makes us all laugh. He is always smiling. Everybody loves to be around my little sanguine boy because he's just so fun. And so for him, moving towards fun is easy. Moving towards what he wants is easy. For the other temperaments, you may find yourself, if you're a choleric, phlegmatic, or a melancholic, you might find yourself judging your desires. You might find yourself saying like, well, that's not worthy of wanting. Like I should only want the holiest thing. And the truth is that wherever you are in your desire, you'll be there for now. It's okay. Just bring it to the Lord. Just don't judge it before it even comes out of your mouth as worthy or unworthy. As long as you're surrendering it to the Lord and handing it to Him, He will always sanctify it. So we can cut out that bit of mental drama. I notice for phlegmatics are people who are very laid back. I have a sister who's phlegmatic, calming people, very present. Everybody loves to have them around because they're great. They're just great listeners, very easygoing. But sometimes acknowledging their own desires can be a struggle for sanguines. So when I coach sanguines, and I do discernment coaching, phlegmatics, many times they're like, well, just tell me what to do. I'll do whatever, just tell me what to do. And you have to kind of reel them in and be like, well, you should decide. You need to decide for yourself. So sometimes that analysis paralysis or that fear of making a choice can really be present for phlegmatics. And finally, the surrender piece, accepting God's timeline. This may be nice and easy for phlegmatics, where, there's always next year. Like we said, they're the laid back, easygoing people. There's always next year. We don't need to take action right away. We can be patient. We can wait. That's awesome. For me and other cholerics like me, this can be a huge struggle, right? We want what we want in our own timeline. And so just knowing kind of the general landscape of who it is that you're leading, who it is that you're coaching, I hope that some of what I've shared here is helpful for you. So if you're coaching someone or leading someone who is a choleric or a melancholic, I have a few questions that you can ask them to just assess like where they are in their spiritual journey, where they maybe need to work towards something to kind of fill in the gaps of where they're missing out in their discernment. So you can ask them, how do you perceive your relationship with God? Do you think you're enough for Him separate from what you do? There's a tremendous temptation to equate your work and your worth. Do you feel you have something to prove in this world or prove to God? Assess what their prayer life looks like. Do you know the Lord's affirming voice? Do you hear His voice and know His love in your heart? And do you spend regular time focusing on quiet on prayer? Here's a very provocative question. Which do you want more? Do you want God's answer? Do you want a milestone or God's love? And that takes a lot of honesty. There were a lot of times when I kind of wish, as a very strong-willed choleric, I kind of wish people had like really pushed me on that a little bit more sometimes in my discernment, because I needed to be pushed. I was the master of like ignoring the elephant in the room, which was that I didn't trust God. And I was really good at convincing myself, oh yeah, no, I do want God's love more than anything. And if you're a mentor for someone like that, just know that it's okay to ask them these really deep, provocative questions and encourage them to think very deeply about it. They're going to be rocked. Their foundation will be rocked, but it will lead to so much progress. If you're dealing with someone who is one of the more laid-back temperaments, perhaps a sanguine or phlegmatic, here are some questions that you can ask them to kind of assess where they are in their discernment. Ask them, what actions have you taken to determine your choice? And not just like a little bit, maybe they've done a little bit or they've written down a plan, but how far have they gotten into that plan, into executing that plan? Where are they? They want to avoid action. That's the natural tendency. So you want to really have them get specific about what it is that they need to do. Here's the provocative question. Would future you be happy with how much you've gone outside your comfort zone to seek an answer, or are you living below your potential? Another thing you can ask them is, do you have mental blocks around changing your current circumstances? You're worried about displeasing, discomfort you're worried about taking on, and really go into those mental blocks with those phlegmatics, those sanguines. Here's one I love for sanguines. How can you make this discernment fun? If you can make it fun, you've got the sanguine, you got them. They're going to do anything if they can make it fun. How can you make this discernment an adventure? I mean, that I'm on board with that. Sanguine is my secondary temperament. All right, let's talk about emotions. There are so many unpleasant emotions that come along with discernment, so many insecurities, particularly if you're discerning in your teens or your 20s, because you just don't have as much life perspective as you do in your 30s and beyond. And there's such a temptation to comparison there. So let's talk about discerning emotions and the role that they play in our discernment. Okay, I'm going to read from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 1771 to 1775. The term passions refers to the affections or the feelings. By his emotions, man intuits the good and suspects evil. The principal passions are love and hatred, desire and fear, joy, sadness, and anger. In the passions, as movements of the sensitive appetite, there is neither moral good nor evil. But insofar as they engage reason and will, there is moral good or evil in them. Emotions and feelings can be taken up in the virtues or perverted by the vices. The perfection of the moral good consists in man's being moved to the good not only by his will, but also by his heart. So really interesting to note here, the Catechism says that emotions are neither good nor bad. They are morally neutral. So the purpose of emotions is to incline us to act in a certain way. They make us tend toward either virtue or vice. So they can elevate us or they can drag us down. And so emotions are actually really useful because they reveal what we're thinking. So if you remember all the way back when I read out those discernment myths, those are thoughts in our mind, sentences in our mind, right? Each one of those ones that I read is going to bring up a negative emotion. And once we can pinpoint what that actual thought is, where the problem is, we have the ability to choose our thoughts. And this is absolutely huge. This is the basis of mindset coaching. This is the basis of our free will, right? Is we get to choose. So we have, I'm going to give you this little continuum. T, thought, emotion, action. So we have an inciting incident. We have something that happens to us. Let's imagine, I'll use an example of a young woman that I was talking to about a job that she held for a short time. It wasn't the right job for her. She quit without, after not too much time. She only held that job for a short amount of time. And as she was describing it to me, and I was hearing about the kind of objective circumstances, my thought about that was, wow, that must have been such a waste of your time. Like, did you feel ashamed that you had to leave? Was it uncomfortable? Did you worry that, you had wasted all this time? And it was interesting because the young woman who had actually been in that situation had the opposite reaction, because she told me a story about how a friend of hers was looking for employment. And through her having that job that she only held for a short time, she was able to get her friend employed at the same company, and her friend actually was very grateful and really, really needed that job. So it's interesting that our thoughts about the same situation could be different, could be actually opposite, depending on what thought we choose. So this is so powerful because there's a space between what happens to us and the thought that we have about it. And then from that thought comes the emotion. And then from that emotion, we are inclined toward action. Okay, so and this is where it's helpful to know this continuum of thought, emotion, action. So when you tell someone, and this is where, like, it might be a bit hard to explain all of this theory. You don't necessarily have to explain this theory to the people that you're leading, but as long as you know it, you can start to uncover those thoughts. So if they come to you and they say, I'm feeling so ashamed, I'm feeling so sad, I'm feeling so, like, I can feel that I'm distrustful of God, I'm feeling separate from God. then you can say, okay, well, why were you feeling that? What were you thinking? And then find out what the narrative in their mind was. Sometimes people aren't used to thinking of the thoughts in their mind as sentences. And so another way you could ask that is, if the words in your mind were a movie script or a book, what would that movie script or what would that book say? And then you ask them to narrate what the actual thought was. And then you can kind of discern what is the action. They've given you the emotion, you discern, you found the thought, and then you can say, hey, is this actually serving you? Is this thought serving you? And you can look at what they feel inclined to do as a result of that emotion. Do they feel inclined to deeper prayer? And not prayer of the frenzied variety where we're desperately trying to get the answer from God right this minute, as I'm inclined to do when I have negative thoughts running through my head, but the kind of patient prayer that leads to surrender and deeper trust in God, leading towards that relationship. Are there actions to act in a frenzied way or to not show up at all, to be absent? What are the fruits of this emotion and thought? So maybe you can invite them to get curious with you. If you find out what the thought is, the emotion and the action, you could say, could something else be true? I love that question as a mindset coach. I love that so much. Could something else be true? Could it be, if their thought is, God is letting me suffer unnecessarily in this discernment agony, you could say, could it actually be true that God is allowing you to gain resilience that's going to prepare you for your future vocation? Could that be true? And sometimes it can be very, very healing to just know that, first of all, I get to choose a different reaction than the one I'm having now. And second of all, there's hope, there's the potential, there's the choice that I have to choose a more hopeful thought. And I can promise you that the more hopeful thought, and I know that you know this as a leader, as a ministry leader, the more hopeful thought is the more true one, because God is good, right? God wants good things for us. So the more hopeful our thoughts are, the more true they actually are. And that's not to put on rose-colored glasses and say, ignore circumstances, but it's to acknowledge the truth that God can bring good out of every difficult situation. Okay, hopefully that is helpful. If you have questions on that later, please let me know. And again, I love coaching people. This is kind of the very beginning of some of the skills that I have as a mindset coach, but if they want to go deeper, or if you want to go deeper, I'm very happy to work with you. So let's look at the discerning God's voice versus the enemy in our thoughts. We're coming to the end of our time here, but we have a few more things to share. So one study at Stanford University found that we think approximately 60,000 thoughts per day, and that 90% of those are recycled thoughts, which I think is absolutely fascinating. And it's been an area of interest to me to discover, where is God in our thoughts and where's the enemy in our thoughts? And I found this incredible little mini discernment lesson from Pope Francis on May 3rd of 2020. That was right at the height of the COVID pandemic. And he gave it was Good Shepherd Sunday. He talked about learning to discern God's voice in your thoughts. And there are 4 characteristics of God's so-called tone of voice that I want to share with you. Okay, so the first one is that God proposes, he does not impose himself. Instead, the evil voice seduces, it assails, it forces, it arouses dazzling illusions and emotions that are tempting but transient. The voice of God instead corrects us with great patience. It always encourages us and consoles us. And I love this so much. God's voice is a voice that has a horizon, whereas the voice of the evil one leads you to a wall. It backs you into a corner. So if you're experiencing a thought in your mind, such as, I'll give you an example. There's no way out of this. You're not good enough. You'll never be good enough. People don't love you enough. There's a feeling of being backed into a corner there, right? Whereas, look how far you've come. You have an opportunity to change right now. Those are thoughts that have a horizon. Those come from the Lord. The second characteristic of God's tone of voice is that it speaks in the present. So I don't know if you've done this before. I absolutely have until I started learning to manage my mind and my thoughts. But if you've ever had a conversation, an imaginary conversation with somebody where you're lying awake at night and you're bringing up all the hurts of the past and you're just parading them out one by one and you're putting them on display, you haven't processed them, that's the voice, that's the enemy's tempting you to do that, to relive all of the hurts of the past and to let them run through your mind over and over and over again. The enemy wants us to have fears of the future as well. What if this happened? What if this terrible thing could happen? Or sadness about the past. On the other hand, the voice of God speaks in the present and says, now you can do good. Now you can exercise the creativity of love. Now you can forego the regrets and remorse that hold your heart captive. The third characteristic of God's tone of voice is that it raises, the devil and God raise two different questions in us. So God's voice is going to seek the highest good. It's going to ask, what is good for me? Whereas the tempter is going to ask, what do I feel like doing? Very different questions. So the evil voice always revolves around the ego, needs, impulses, everything straight away. It's like Pope Francis equates it to like a little 2-year-old child having a tantrum. Whereas God's voice, he says, never promises joy at a low price. I love that so much. It invites us to go beyond our ego in order to find good, true peace. So finally, the fourth characteristic is that God's voice loves sunlight. There's different environments. So the Lord loves openness, truth, sincere transparency, whereas the enemy will say to us, close up in yourself, no one understands you, no one listens to you, don't trust. There's a darkness there. So those four characteristics have just been so helpful for me. And if you're mentoring someone and they come to you and they're confiding in you and what you're hearing is a lot of negative thoughts that clearly come from the evil one, according to these four criteria, you're going to ask them, who would want you to continue thinking this thought? Would God want you to continue thinking it, or would the devil want you to continue thinking it? That is a very powerful question. Okay, finally today, I'm going to share with you five strategies for decision making. These are from St. Ignatius of Loyola's spiritual exercises. The discernment exercises are so wonderful. Spiritual exercises, they're so wonderful. And I think it's so wise that St. Ignatius really grounds everything in relationship. Just like I said at the beginning of this talk, people love to go skip to the end and look at the rules for discernment. And I noticed that people love to go to the rules. They love to pick apart the rules because they want to find out exactly the right answer so that there's no risk and they make sure that they make the right decision. When in reality, St. Ignatius wants you to spend 30 days crawling into the mind of Christ, entering into these biblical scenes, really putting your attention on Christ so that you are actually learning how to see him properly and to begin to think with his mind and to receive from him all the graces. And then after all that, then at the very end, that there's the rules for discernment. I just think that's so beautiful about St. Ignatius of Loyola. But sometimes you've got people in your life who get to a point in their discernment where they're doing all the things we talked about earlier. They're praying, they're surrendering, they're faithful to the sacraments, they're taking action. They have a strong prayer life. They love the Lord. They've come so far in their relationship with him, and yet they still don't know what to do. I found myself at this point after I had surrendered my life to the Lord in a very big way. I was preparing to enter a convent, and then I started feeling that worm of discontent again and started feeling a desire growing for marriage. This was at the end of my religious discernment process, and I felt like the Lord was like doing a bait and switch on me. I was like, look, I'm willing to give you my life as a nun. I'm happy, I'm excited to do that. And now all of a sudden that my peace is gone. What does this mean? So sometimes, you do need to kind of just have these practical things that are just going to help you move from your mind spinning and all the confusion into an action, because the devil really can use overextended periods of discernment. There's no Our Lady of Perpetual Discernment, right? The Lord will help you as you're moving your feet. And if you make a wrong choice, I always get to say, for almost every decision, you get to go back. You can backtrack. You can choose something different. But if you're if you're guiding someone who's doing all the right things and they still don't know, here's 5 things you can try. So first of all, spiritual direction. I always recommend finding a spiritual director. I know that that can be extremely difficult. Everybody always asks me, how do I find a spiritual director? There's a website that I heard about a year ago, and I've only heard good things. It's called, I believe it's spiritualdirection.com runs it, but I think you go to getdirection.app, or I wish I had looked this up beforehand, but I think it's getdirection.app. And you can Google it. I'm sure it's on the Google, and you can get matched with a spiritual director. I always encourage people as well to, the spiritual exercises are supposed to be done under the direction of a spiritual director. And I think pretty much every saint in history practically has had a spiritual director. So it's a pretty good thing to have. I encourage people to look outside of their parish priest. Parish priests often are so overloaded with responsibilities that they may not have time to take on the directees in their parishes. But ask your priest, do you know of other secular trained spiritual directors, or maybe sisters? Maybe there's some sisters in a local convent who could see you. There's other creative solutions that are starting to emerge as alternatives. So sometimes a spiritual director can just have the authority of the Holy Spirit and be able to tell you, and be able to give you a direction that you can trust comes from the Lord. So second of all, we've got consolation and desolation. Now this kind of goes into discernment of spirits. It's a little bit, there's a lot to be unpacked here. So I don't think that I have left myself enough time to fully unpack desolation and consolation, but there's a couple ways that you can kind of help someone tease out, like let's say they're discerning a relationship with a significant other. And you can ask them, does this relationship lead you to be the best version of yourself? Do you want to be better? Are you pursuing holiness together? Or do you feel ashamed with this person? Do you feel the need to hide? Do you feel the need to close up in yourself? What is it that this person's bringing out of you? I wish I had more time to explore consolation and desolation on this webinar, but I would point you to Father Timothy Gallagher's Discerning Hearts podcast. He really goes deeply into detail about the discernment of spirits, as well as any of his books. So I'll just leave it at that. But basically, consolation and desolation are spirits sent to us by the Lord, as well as kind of natural ups and downs in our spiritual life. I'm just going to leave it there because we're running out of time. Deathbed test is number 3. St. Ignatius says, imagine yourself on your deathbed, looking back at your life. What would you want to have chosen now? And I love this exercise because it really helps you shed those motivations that are not noble, that aren't the deepest. It can help reveal that maybe you're trying to please your parents in a way that you're trying too hard, to the point where you're not acknowledging God's will or your own desires. It can help you understand if you're just trying to go with the crowd and that's why you want this thing or that thing. Next is time limit. So one thing you can do is to take, depending on how much time you have, either 3 days or a week, and commit in your mind to one decision. Let's say you have decision A, decision B. You commit to decision A for 3 days. You don't allow yourself to waffle. You don't allow yourself to go back and forth in your mind. You just imagine, I have committed to this decision. And then you do the same thing for decision B. You commit to that in your mind for 3 days. That can have an incredible power to reveal all of the things, all of the thoughts, the emotions, everything that's going to flow from each one of those decisions in a way that you can't see if you're just constantly vacillating between the two. Fifth is peace. And there's so much to say about peace because we can have a false peace, right? We can have a false peace, which is the devil trying to lull us into inactivity or complacency in a way that we shouldn't. However, when there's true peace, and maybe you can see that, often you can see that, I think, as an outside observer. When I met my husband, the questioning that I had with my previous boyfriends, the analyzing of the relationship from every possible aspect, and talking to all my friends, what do you think about this? And going to my mom for advice constantly, because I was trying to justify and trying to make this thing work that really wasn't working. When I started dating my husband, all that went away. None of that was present in our relationship. It wasn't perfect. There were discernments within each stage of our relationship, but there was an undercurrent of peace that just was flowing through everything that we did. And any kind of discernments that we had were mini discernments of whether or not we were the right ones for each other, came to light and got answered. They didn't just kind of float around and exist in darkness, or I didn't have to keep stuffing them down. And everyone around me could see that piece. And I can see that when people come and talk to me. You can see that, I'm sure. When you're guiding young people, you can see and start to help them discern. And like, chances are, if you're in this webinar, that you have more life perspective, and you can look at them and say, you know, I think I see that piece shining in your eyes, or I think you're really trying to make this work in a way that it's not meant to work. So again, I'm gonna rush through to the end here because I know we're at the very end of our presentation, but I hope you've enjoyed this. And please let me know if you have questions. I'm gonna hand it back to Erin whenever you wanna come back on.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Stacey. I'll give you a second here to take a breath. And I invite all of you joining us today to send a question to Stacey. What are you dying to learn more about? Whatever that might be. I really appreciate this. It's been very enlightening and also very hopeful, I feel. If somebody would want to maybe strengthen their skills in walking with someone in the process of discerning, you know, whatever it might be in their life, how could they, what would you suggest? Where can they start? What should they do?
I'm a reader. There's so many good Catholic books out there. Podcasts as well. My podcast is really aimed at helping people understand the art of discernment. And I think if you're seeking to, you know, I would encourage you to check out Called and Caffeinated. But again, I mentioned it earlier, Father Timothy Gallagher has a wonderful Discernment of Spirits podcast where you can really start to gain knowledge of how God's voice sounds, how to discern it in your own life. And I think the more you pursue your own prayer life and the more you pursue your own holiness, the better, you know, the better it's going to be for you as a leader. I wish I had more resources outside of like me and what I do, because honestly, I think what I do is unique, and this is kind of the gap that I'm attempting to fill, where I perceive that there is such a gap of understanding how to help others discern, you know, or understanding the art of discernment. So I don't want to be too self-referential, but my podcast and YouTube channel, a lot of people have said, are very helpful. And my book also is geared towards that, you know, towards really understanding God's voice. And then also I'm a mindset coach. So all of the Metanoia Catholic mindset coaches are fantastic, and we're all trained to help people understand where God is in our thoughts. And when you learn that mental management, then you can also pass that on to other people. So I wish I had more resources, but I do think honestly there is a gap there. Thank you for the question. I wish I had more for you.
Maybe that'll be your next book.
Maybe that'll be my next book. Oh, that'd be great.
Tell us a little bit more about what you do and Metanoia.
Yeah, so I'm just completing my certification right now. I've known Matt and Erin Ingold, who are the founders, since 2020. They started the Virtual Catholic Conference right around the same time when I was doing my Be Not Afraid conference, and we had a Zoom call, and we were like, you're doing the same thing I'm doing. Let's be on a team. And I've been in touch with them, but I have not entered into their training program until this year, because I had a special needs daughter in 2021 who has really required a lot of my care and my focus and my attention, as well as my other 3 children, of course. But but special needs parenting is an overwhelming journey. And so really the reason I signed up to become a metanoia coach was because I knew that I needed it the most. I could see that a lot of the difficulties of special needs parenting and a lot of the negative self-talk were seeping into every area of my life, and I was starting to develop this victim mentality. And so I thought, if I can overcome this, I think anybody can overcome anything. And so what I've really learned is that there is such incredible power in management beyond what you can actually describe in a short sentence. Like, the effects of it in your life can't be quantified. And there's such freedom in having the ability to choose your thoughts without even having to change your circumstances. And I think one of the biggest epiphanies for me is that you actually don't need to change the difficult things in your life in order for them to go from feeling like burdens to actually joyfully living. Like, the difficult things don't actually need to change in order for that to happen. And that's been absolutely enormous for me. So I love coaching one-on-one. I'm starting to take clients now, and it's just so beautiful to see where God shows up. There's probably one of my favorite things to do as a coach is to help people process emotions. And basically what that is the Lord does the work. You invite him into it with the client's permission, and you kind of, first of all, just like really clarify what are they thinking about? What's their emotion? What is it that they're grieving? Why is it that they feel sad? And then you invite Jesus into that scene, and you form a picture of that scene. Then you invite Jesus in. It's been so beautiful to see the transformation that the Lord can work and how he's going to show up. So that's a little overview. This is a little personal testimony, but yeah, if anybody has more specific questions about that, please let me know. It's kind of a, mindset coaching is like an unregulated industry, and some people, when I've told them about it, I see the suspicious look in their eyes, and they're like, "What is that, like manifesting?" And it's like, well, yes, for some people, those people are out there. But for metanoia, it's all based on Thomas Aquinas's ontological mapping of the human person and the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Like, it's very, very, very Catholic. And I have found nothing. They have priests proofread their courses, make sure they're not heresy. And we found, that it really leads you closer to the Lord, not away.
Right. Well, thank you so much for sharing that and that resource and your experience. Very, very helpful. So let me go back to my screen here. And you've mentioned a little bit about your book, but let's talk a little bit more about that. Why would somebody need this, or want it?
Yeah. So many people come to me saying, how do I find what the Lord wants me to do with my life? And my question for them is, well, if the Lord spoke to you and told you, would you know how his voice sounds? Like, do you actually know what God speaking is like, what that experience is like? And I found in just my I've been asking this question a lot over the years. And what I found is that 90% of the time people are like, oh, I never thought about that before. I don't really think God wants to speak to me, to be honest. To be completely honest. Like, I think he wants to speak to Teresa of Avila, but little me over here, not so much. And that's how I felt too. I actually didn't know how to listen for the Lord's voice. I didn't think that he wanted to speak to me. And truth be told, I was kind of scared to hear his voice. And so really, Adventure Awaits is a memoir. It's me laying it all out of my own journey of all these transformations and adventures, but really it's also about that deeper journey of learning to hear the Lord speak, learning to walk in relationship with him, and learning to let him direct my choices. So, and I really, as I've shared many times in this presentation, I'm an action person. So I it was mandatory when I wrote the book that people have practical takeaways, because not only do I want and hope that people will get past the mental block of thinking God doesn't want to speak to me. Not only do I want to transform that into, yes, he does want to speak to you, but I also want them to have really practical exercises that they can do to start to connect more deeply with the Lord, and really practical things to start taking steps towards hearing his voice. And each chapter focuses on a different way that you could look out for the Lord's voice in your life. Some of them are more ordinary. Maybe they're things that you do, but you've never really thought, hey, the Lord could actually speak to me through this. And then other things are a little more extraordinary, like receiving visions or hearing the Lord's voice in your mind or in the room externally outside of yourself. So we kind of cover a bunch of different bases. But it's all about improving that communication with the Lord. And you know, he loves you so much, and he wants your good so much. And I really hope that this book will help people move past the mental block of thinking God doesn't want to speak to me until I'm a great saint, because it's not true.
Right. Oh, I love that. Thank you so much. So
you're welcome.
Yeah, so typically we offer 10% off on, you know, the presenter's book here if it's an Ave author. But right now we have the flash sale going on, and today is the last day. So you could actually get 40% off Stacey's book today. So as well as almost everything on our website is 40% off. So go to AveMariaPress.com. Okay. All right. Well, Stacey, thank you so much for sharing your passion with us and what you've learned in your own life, and how you're sharing it with others. It's really beautiful, and we're just really honored to hear all about it and able to incorporate these things in our own spiritual lives as well as with those that we might lead or minister to. So thank you so much. I know you're a busy woman, so taking this time is really greatly appreciated.
Thank you so much, Erin. Thank you for doing all the work that you did to facilitate this. And thank you so much to everyone who joined. Keep in touch with me. I love hearing from people. So yes, thank you so much.
I will definitely include your website in the follow-up email so that people can go and learn more and receive that free resource that you mentioned at the beginning. So we'll include that. And I invite you to join us May 13th. Colin Miller is going to talk about encountering Christ in the poor and how parishes can really live out their mission to the poor. And so as Stacey provided practical things for us today, this next webinar will also. So thank you, everyone. Continue to have a blessed Easter, and we will talk to you soon. Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.